You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
So, throughout the entire pandemic, we've been told, we don't have these eviction moratoriums in place. Millions of Americans will just automatically be kicked to the streets, lose their homes. And just the cycle of Rona spreading, there's no end to it. We've been told that time and time again, haven't we? Well, now we're kind of seeing some of the flip side to the reality that landlords have been paying all of the tenant side of the equation this whole time. Some have, some haven't, depending on, who their tenants are. But now we've got the eviction moratoriums basically being sunsetted. The CDC had theirs thrown out by the Supreme Court last week before. We've got the federal unemployment benefits expiring, and we've just got a lot of stuff going on. And I think what's going to happen is a lot of this stuff is you're not going to hear much about it because it's not really going to have that big of an impact. I don't think you're going to see the millions of Americans kicked to the curb, evicted on the sidewalks. You're just not going to see that. That's some of what we're covering today. Covering some of the impacts of landlords throughout this whole process, even if they haven't been paid by their tenants, because for whatever eviction moratorium in place, they've still got to make their payments, don't they? And one of them that's super important, taxes. Death and taxes, right? That's what we're going to be focusing on. And then a couple more segments. I've got a couple other articles that kind of point out some of the things that I've been kind of thinking about, just repercussions of the eviction moratoriums all along. And I think what's going to happen, this stuff's going to get sunsetted. And you know what? We're not going to hear much in the way of news. It's going to be, crickets. That's interesting. Why is that? Well, because the crazy predictions of all these people being evicted and being homeless, they're not going to happen. Not going to happen. That's my prediction. All right, let's jump on in. But before we do, if you're new here, my name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, and I read the news from a real estate guy's perspective. Some would even say it's reasonable compared to what you find in the rest of media out there. All right, let's jump on in. Landlords, the eviction moratorium will have lasting effects on tenants and neighborhoods. And I've said that from day one. Basically, your rents are going to go up at some point here pretty hard. We're already seeing evidence of that. That is happening. But this article I wanted to read because it does focus on the landlord side. So New York has extended eviction protections for tenants through January. So individually, these cities and states and local jurisdictions, they have the ability put their own eviction moratorium in place. Most of the ones that I know of, they're either ending sort of at the end of September or, the October 3rd was the date for the CDC eviction moratorium that just basically got ripped up and torn away because it wasn't legal. Even as our fine esteemed leader indicated, there might be some issues with that extension of the eviction moratorium by the CDC. It might not be legal. He didn't whisper, but he could have, and it would have had the same impact, right? So New York has extended eviction protections for tenants through January, yet there's a gaping hole involving landlords. What's going on here? I mean, when one class of people has all their bills covered, and the other class does not, how could there be any holes? There's a gaping hole involving landlords. Some are now falling behind in property taxes. And that could ultimately fall back on the people who rent from them and on the neighborhoods. It will, for sure, but not necessarily in the ways that you think. So I don't make enough money to subsidize city rental properties, said Rich Tyson. Meaning he doesn't make enough money if his tenants are not paying to cover the taxes. So what a lot of folks don't realize is that majority of landlords are not fat cats looking at a huge pile of cash. They might get their pile of cash when they sell these properties, but in the meantime, they have to get there. Meaning if they don't have income in the form of their rent from their tenants, who all these governmental entities have said, it's okay for you not to pay, the landlords are stuck still making the mortgage payments, still making the tax payments. Oh, hey, there's that. Still got to cover insurance. You've still got to cover maintenance. You've still got to cover management. You've still got to cover repair on all this stuff. AC unit breaks down. Nah, you're not paying rent. I'm just not gonna fix that for you. How quickly do you think that would end up in a lawsuit? Yep, super quick. So Tyson is a realtor who wanted to do more to invest in Rochester neighborhoods. So he became a landlord. Gradually, over 5 years, he acquired and refurbished 37 properties. That's a job well done. That's just over 7 a year. That's some hard work. You have 37 properties. That's a full-time gig. Then came the notices in the mail. These are what I'm starting to get, which are back taxes, he told 13 Wham. Tyson says he owes a combined $52,000 in taxes to the city of Rochester and Monroe County. Some of that is in arrears. Mortgages, insurances, all these things that are an emergency today if they don't get paid. So the taxes are a bill a lot of us have had to put on the back burner, he said of he and his fellow landlords. So those oftentimes come up, quarterly or maybe once or twice a year. You need to pay those taxes depending on how your individual area handles it. But if you don't have to make that payment for a while down the road and you've got all these other things like a mortgage payment to pay without your tenant paying and without the federal relief money coming anytime soon, you got to prioritize those bills. And so taxes are one of those things where people are like, okay, I got 5 months left and I got to pay that. All right, I'm going to put that one off and I'm going to pay the more important bills. And let's hope that we can get to a point where I can either get a new tenant in who's paying or get some of that federal hard cash money that everybody's been waiting on, that has had a very difficult time going from the federal government to state and then local governments and actually getting into the hands of the landlords and tenants who need it. So the majority of that is from losses, talking about not being able to make his tax payments. The majority of that is from losses I've had to take for housing people for free for 1.5 years, he added. What? Huh. Interesting. That makes sense, right? So when you house people for free, yeah, you might not be able to make some of your payments. Taxes being one of them. And you know what happens when you don't pay your taxes? Yeah. Your property gets sold in a tax sale to cover the said taxes. The National Apartment Association says of every dollar a landlord takes in, 14 cents goes to property taxes. It doesn't sound like much, but factor in that many renters stopped paying a single dime because of moratoriums meant to ease the hardships of the pandemic, and it adds up. How we get an eviction moratorium that only covers one side, that to me is just mind-blowing. Tyson said when COVID hit, he lost 60% of his rental income from tenants who had stopped paying and were protected from eviction. It's something he predicted in a video he posted to Twitter last year, aimed at then Governor Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, no longer in office. Interesting, right? I'm sending my tax bills over to Andrew Cuomo, he says in the video. In the video, he explains that the majority of his tenants who had stopped paying continued to collect social service payments meant to go to rent. So they've still got an adequate amount of money to pay rent. They're just choosing not to because they don't have to. As a housing provider, I don't want to throw people out. And that's what I've said all along, is that it's not that these landlords are just, oh, I'm so eager. I would just love to throw out at least a couple of tenants this month. I mean, it's not good for business. You throw tenants out, it's costly. I mean, it takes a toll on you financially and emotionally. Just getting people out, having to maybe deal with an attorney, whatever it is, having to go through the court system, total nightmare. You'd much rather cut a deal with your tenant and make it just, happen, whether that's them staying or not staying or whatever. So as a housing provider, I don't want to throw people out, he said. The problem is the courts have not been checking the facts if these people have been impacted by COVID. They kind of made it such an open-ended deal where, are you going to be impacted by COVID? Kind of like the PPP loans. Is there a chance in the next year that you might, on the slightest chance, be impacted economically? Your businesses might be economically impacted from COVID, from the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. And it's very easy for most businesses to indicate, yeah, Yeah, I think so. I mean, that would make sense, right? There are tax liens against at least 194 residential properties in Monroe County. 149 of those are in the city of Rochester. After protests in Rochester and across the state, lawmakers extended the ban on evictions. Of course they did. The move protects landlords with up to 10 units from having properties with liens sold out from under them. Well, that's nice. Yet they'll eventually have to pay the back taxes they owe. So why didn't we have a, taxes, moratorium? No more taxes. It was just no more taxes. No, because then the government and governmental entities, they'd have a harder time running their programs. And yeah, we don't really care about landlords. That's the bottom line here. So there's a federal fund of $46.5 billion to help tenants get checks to their landlords, yet only about 1/5 of the money has gone out so far. And that's even less than that here in King County, just a fraction of the money, because they've just got such an antiquated system, and they're building a system, we're told. Money's going to go out. It's going to go out faster. But just, wait, hold your horses. We know the eviction moratoriums are off, and we've got another Seattle or Washington moratorium to the end of September. I can't remember. Those things just come and go, right? So Tyson said he is now selling his properties to avoid bankruptcy. All but 3 of the properties he has sold so far are going to large landlords who don't live here but are scooping up property. What do you think those landlords will do when units become available for rent? Are they going to keep them at the same price? Probably not. They will have paid a premium for buying the properties, and they're going to squeeze every single nickel out of it. And so tenants, if you are not grade A tenants, you're not getting housing like you would have expected to prior to the whole pandemic, because rental housing is going to go to those with the absolute best credit history, biggest down payments, those that bring their A game. Those are the folks that are going to be able to survive moving forward. That's not going to be everybody. So people who, wanted to take advantage of the eviction moratorium and they didn't pay rent, moving forward, that's going to be tricky. Tyson said he is now selling his properties to avoid bankruptcy. All but 3 of the properties he has sold so far are going to large landlords who don't live here but are scooping up property. He said that punishes good tenants who are also struggling and now may face higher rents from a new landlord they've never even met. This makes sense, right? I mean, this absolutely makes sense. If you're a landlord and you've had this property and you've had a handful of tenants who haven't been making payments, you want to dump this thing, it's going to go to well-heeled investors, right? If they even keep it as a rental property. It may well go to somebody who wants to own or occupy it, meaning it's no longer a rental property. And that's the vast majority of what I see going on here in Seattle, is that rental properties are being put on the market and they're being purchased owner occupied, further constricting the supply of single-family rental homes. So as the people who can't get out from under tax foreclosures start to go under, then we've got vacant properties that sit for years and years, he said. The impacts are going to be felt way beyond COVID. And this is what I've been talking about for since we've kind of realized, hey, these eviction moratoriums are real and they're in place. And holy cow, how did we get here? How do we get to a position where people's properties, they can't use them as they want to? It's just, it's mind-blowing to me. But here we are. And one of those things is that the landlords, despite these moratoriums, they still got to make their payments, whether it's mortgage, whether it's taxes, whether it's homeowners' dues, whether it's insurance, all that stuff. They still got to pay them. And taxes, if you don't pay your taxes, it's not going to end up well for you. It's not like you can really negotiate. I mean, you can negotiate it to a little bit, a small extent. They can put you on a payment plan, but this whole thing, it's been something else for landlords. And I think that the time is pretty close to, we're ripping off that Band-Aid. We are right now, because I've heard very little from Congress indicating, all right, we're going to throw this in here and we're going to get another eviction ban. I have not seen that story. Maybe I've missed out on that. But if you see that story out there, let me know. Are we going to have more camping on the Capitol steps outside during fall? It's cold out there. Concrete's hard. It's cold. We're going to have that and get another extension of some moratorium? Probably. All right, let's jump into a second one here that I thought was interesting. As California's eviction deadlines nears, Bay Area housing officials turn to volunteers and nonprofits. Now, why are they doing that? Well, because they're trying to get their money on the federal money. They're trying to get their hands on the federal money that's been given by the federal government to the states and then trickles on down. That trickle isn't happening real fast. Carol Lillig and the church ladies at St. Vincent de Paul in Morgan Hill have been helping struggling renters for a couple of decades, long before the pandemic throttled the work lives of landscapers, school bus drivers, and child care workers. Essential workers, right? On a recent weekday, Lillig sat outside the church of a folding table across from Xiomara Galicia, a single mom who lost her retail job at the beginning of the pandemic. Galicia, 36, has 4 school-aged children. That sounds hard. $123 in unpaid rent, doing pretty good to only have $123 in unpaid. $123 in unpaid rent and an unemployment benefit about to end. That's another one of the things that folks are concerned about. And from a reasonable standpoint, okay, if you legit lost your job, you've been out actively searching, and you've been relying upon the unemployment benefit, that's coming to an end. So that's another thing that I think people are worried about. Will that have a massive impact? That part, I don't think so either. It doesn't help, but it doesn't send millions of Americans to the curb. I don't think that happens. So this tenant, she worried even a small blemish on her rent record would ruin future chances for housing. She needed help. To be behind is stressful, Lillig told her, and took photos of Galicia's financial documents and uploaded them into an online relief application. Lillig told Galicia that she should qualify to have her back rent covered and future rent paid for the next 3 months under the complex formulas used by local and state agencies to reimburse landlords. Thank you, Galicia said. I'm just really grateful. All right, but then you got to get that money to the landlords. And that's the biggest complaint I've heard, is that process, it's $46.5 billion. That process has not been going quickly, and it certainly can't come quick enough for a segment of the population that's been carrying another segment of the population's bills for a year and a half. So Lillig is part of an essential and growing piece of California's naughty, as in K-N-O-T-T-Y, not N-A-U-G-H-T-Y, and naughty and faltering $5 billion rental relief effort. Volunteers, part-time workers, community activists, and do-gooders sitting side by side with delinquent renters, calling landlords and urging government agencies to send money ASAP. So they're just putting the heat on where the money is, right? About $500 million in federal funds is earmarked for the Bay Area, but how quickly it will be set out and how many families it will help before the eviction ban ends this month remain looming questions. Bay Area social agencies are leaning hard on smaller nonprofits and recruiting other institutions. Santa Clara County courts have begun promoting the local relief efforts, trying to bridge the trust gap between landlords and tenants. I'm surprised that as many landlords and tenants don't know that this federal relief money is out there. One of the East Bay's largest community organizations expects to double the number of social agencies it's using for outreach. The state also has more than tripled its number of caseworkers. Yet the frustration continues to mount. The California Relief Program, supplemented by an additional $2 billion in aid. We are just awash in aid money here, right? So California Relief Program, an additional $2 billion in aid for unpaid utility bills, has been marred by glitchy application websites, confusing requirements for local and state programs, and some skepticism among landlords and tenants. Progress has been glacial, said Santa Clara County eviction attorney Todd Rothberg. He has reached out to housing officials to facilitate aid payments to his landlord clients, hoping to get batches of applications done uniformly and efficiently. But efforts have stalled, he said. So this is that flip side. Hey, the money's there. Just wait for your money. Well, unfortunately, you got to follow a lot of criteria in order to get there, right? And the money's actually got to be available to you. And for so many of the landlords that desperately need this money so they don't have to sell their properties, it's not coming fast enough. Here's why I want to read this particular article, this next sentence. The myth is that landlords are frothing at the bit to evict, Rothbard said. He's an eviction attorney. He would know. The myth is that landlords are frothing at the bit to evict, Rothbard said. In most cases, all they want to do is get paid. They evict somebody, they're not going to get paid. If there's money out there that they might be able to get a hold of to cover the arrears, the rent that's in arrears, they're going to hold out for that. And that's why I think this whole eviction moratorium thing has just been such a cluster, because landlords, they don't want to just throw people out willy-nilly. They really don't. They want to get paid. If they toss people, not going to get paid. So not recognizing the logic on how this, the optics of this, I think so many people are like, oh, we're all going to get kicked to the curb. No, you're not. That's not what landlords want, because it's like big lenders during the Great Recession. They learned, oh, we are not in the business of taking housing back, foreclosing on housing, and putting it back on the market and making money. We do not make money in that process. Landlords, unless they've got a tenant who's not paying and is not cooperating and they're not going to get money anyway, they're not going to want to bump people out. Yeah, I've talked to a bunch of landlords that have basically just said that, point blank. Hey, if there's a chance we're going to get paid, we're going to hang out and wait. We've waited this long. Why wouldn't we wait a little bit longer to see if some of that hard Fed cash money comes? The U.S. Supreme Court's rejection of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention eviction moratorium last month has spurred federal officials to find ways to lower barriers to get relief to tenants and landlords. Why is it that this one has been so bad, this federal rollout? I don't know. It's got to be the system. It's got to be the way that the system just wasn't really put in place. The CDC ban had little effect in California, where tenant protections are more comprehensive, kind of like Seattle. But I think Seattle's ends September 30th, I believe, or Washington's. The state eviction moratorium expires September 30th, although renters can receive limited protections by applying for state assistance through March 2022. California housing officials have received requests for $1.4 billion in relief, and they've paid out $426 million, roughly 30%, since the program launched in March through August 31st. In the Bay Area, San Mateo County families completed 4,063 applications for $57 million and have received about 22.3, so more than 30, but less than 50. Large cities and counties were allowed to establish individual programs and have primarily focused on the poorest renters most likely to become homeless. Oakland suspended its local program in May after being flooded with applications for its $13 million share. The city expects to reopen the program when new funds become available. All right, so not all the money is going to get out there that needs to get out there. That's the harsh reality. Are landlords going to just kick people to the curb? No, I don't think so. But let's just keep reading. Let's just, don't trust me. Why would you trust me? I'm a real estate guy. What would I know about evictions? Actually, yeah, that does make sense, doesn't it? I might know just a little bit of something about the mechanisms. All right. But some have found running aid programs too cumbersome. At least 9 cities and counties, including Solana County, have folded local programs and turned administration over to the state in Southern California. Los Angeles and Orange County also have switched to state administration after trying to manage distribution. It's a big process, and it's really complicated. And trying to line up people who qualify versus don't qualify and then get the money out. I mean, we've seen what happens when you have things go sideways with the Employment Security Department here in the state of Washington. You might have like $576 million stolen by a Nigerian fraud ring. I mean, something like that might just happen. No, so these governmental entities, they're trying to get it right, and they don't have the ability to push this money out very fast. All right. So we've got that going on. You've got church volunteers kind of working on that. They're doing as much as they can. They're pushing out money as much as they can. But what you're not hearing about is just thousands of people being kicked to the curb all at once, like we were told would happen. And even if that did happen, those people would be outside where the Rona spreads less easily. Do you see where I'm going with this? Does a lot of this make sense? No, it doesn't. I think we've been fed a huge pack of not truths on this whole deal. Okay. My last, and I'm not going to read this whole article. I'm going to do a separate podcast on this, but evictions not yet spiking in Hawaii despite moratorium's end. What? Why not? Why aren't people just getting kicked to the curb willy-nilly? Why aren't they? I mean, we were told that's what would happen. Evictions not yet spiking in Hawaii despite moratorium's end. All right, I'm going to skip through on this because I'm going to do a separate podcast. But what I want you to hear from this one is that, all right, so we had the statewide eviction moratorium. We had the whole CDC thing. We got renters are still protected. However, because of blah, 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 blah. Since then, however, there doesn't seem to have been a rush of evictions in Hawaii. That's weird. That's crazy. Interestingly, this is a quote. Interestingly, we have not been flooded with cases as we have anticipated, said Tracy Wilgan, executive director of the Mediation Center of the Pacific, a nonprofit that provides mediation services for landlord-tenant disputes. Because landlords don't make money if they have to go through these processes. And they're probably, and I've said it, I don't know how many times, they're probably going to walk away from a lot of money that they're owed. And the flip side is that they get their tenants out of there that are non-paying. Those tenants move on. They move on to a tenant that is paying. They hold their property, wait for price to go up, eventually sell it, or they're going to bump up the rents to try and recoup some of these losses. This is just where we sit. And I think Hawaii is a good example of this. So we're just, interestingly, we have not been flooded with cases as we have anticipated. Maybe not yet. Okay. I'm willing to entertain that. I bet you it just flat doesn't happen. You're going to see some cases, but remember, throughout this whole period, in a year's time, there's a lot of eviction cases that happen just normally, right? It's not like because of the pandemic, pre-pandemic, there were 0 evictions ever. Now there's always a certain percentage of people that fall on hard times, can't make their payments. And guess what? You signed a contract. Yeah, your stuff gets thrown out on the curb. So this Mediation Center of the Pacific, they indicate, we expected it last week when they announced the CDC moratorium ended. We expected it this week, and we haven't seen it. Maybe we're just not going to get a huge number, she said. Interesting. What could be behind that? Is that the way this is going to go? We pull these restrictions off and not really anything happens? I think that's exactly how this goes. I do. I think you'll see some stories, but for the most part, you know what it'll be? You're going to have these conversations. Hey, whatever happened with those eviction moratoriums? Did we sunset? There was some ridiculous podcaster guy always talking about that stuff, and he just kind of stopped talking about it. And I really haven't seen much about it in the news. Just haven't really seen much about it. What happened there? I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Yeah. So I think these eviction moratoriums, they get sunsetted. Some of the landlords, they'll get their money. There'll be billions of dollars out there to federal government and local and state governments. They'll struggle to get it out. And then we'll kind of just stop talking about this. It'll become one of those, it's a non-story. It doesn't really have any legs to go on. It just kind of goes away, and we'll think back on that. Remember that time during the COVID pandemic that landlords couldn't collect rent from their tenants if their tenants signed some kind of affidavit? I've been impacted by the Rona. Remember that? God, that was weird, wasn't it? Whatever happened to that? I don't know. I think it just kind of went away. I think that's exactly what happens. And like I've said before, the beauty of saying these things that aren't necessarily the most popular of opinions. The beauty of saying these things on a podcast is we can look back and see what I actually said. Huh. Interesting. Now, these are my predictions. This is how I see it going. It's like, whatever happened to the eviction moratorium? They just kind of went away. Did a lot of people get evicted? No, not really. Oh, that's weird. Huh. Wonder why. Actually, I don't really care. I didn't get evicted. I'm talking as if I'm somebody else. I don't own any rental properties. Don't really give a rat's ass about any of that. All right, next. Hey, what's on TV tonight? You remember when you used to ask that? Now you just got to bury deep down and find it in whatever cable. What was I watching? I was watching 2 for the Money with Matthew McConaughey. That guy's a great actor. He's a manly man, isn't he? He was playing the part of a sports bookie, doing predictions with oh man, who was his co-star in that one? I can't remember. Good movie. Check it out. 2 for the Money. Saw that in 2005, one of the last movies. Yeah, not going to go there. Okay, so that's it. That's it for me. I am going to cover this Hawaii one though, because I think Hawaii is on the front end of not having a lot of people get kicked to the curb. Okay, check back here to find out though. All right, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Until next time we meet, next time we talk, stay safe. We'll talk to you then. Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.